Hello. Welcome to Rest of Us event. Today we'll be discussing tech startups and policy making in 2026, especially in the age of AI. My name is Damilare Dosumu. I'm a Rest of World reporter based out of Lagos, Nigeria. And today, Ananya, who is a reporter of Rest of World, my colleague, my superstar colleague, based out of Mumbai, India, is going to be moderating conversation. Joining us today is Shweta Rajpal Kohli. She's the president and CEO of Startup Policy Forum, an industry platform that represents 60 of India's high-growth startups, together valued at $100 billion. A little bit of housekeeping announcement. This event is going to be recorded, so you can switch up your video. And also, if you have questions, you can always drop it in the DM, and we're going to address that at the end of the event. And you can also follow Shweta and Ananya on their social media so that you can take them up on some further questions that you have. Ananya, over to you.
It's lovely to see everyone kind of trickling in. I know we have lots of people who are interested in joining from academia, from tech companies, VCs. It was a diverse range of signups, so I'm very happy to see everybody here today. And so glad to have you, Shweta. I'm very happy to take some of our offline conversations online. And of course, we'll get into talking about your role with public policy over the last decade or so, and then also about Startup Policy Forum. But I want to start with a broader question. It's been a weird time for the world, right? There has been a lot of conflict. There's been a lot of trade tensions. We've seen India navigate your tariff, seen them navigate talent wars, chip supply shortages, all of that. And it comes amid calls for Atmanirbhar Bharat or self-reliant India. So I just want to know from you broadly, what is the impact of geopolitical events that have been happening around the world on the startup community in, say, the last 3 to 4 months?
Thank you, Ananya. Firstly, huge fan of Rest of World. So thank you so much. And it's a real privilege and honor to be here with you, talking to you. And yes, I've truly enjoyed all our offline conversations. So happy to take this online. Yes, I think weird is an understatement. It's been an absolutely unprecedented time for, policy professionals like us, for geopolitics. I mean, we went to DC recently as part of our Startup Safari program, and I spoke to some regulars, who have been regularly reporting on White House or engaging with the White House, and the one message we had was that this is a time we have never seen in geopolitical history. The uncertainty has been unprecedented. And I think, Ananya, every crisis presents itself with an opportunity. And the opportunity here has been that in the midst of the kind of uncertainty that we're seeing, the kind of trade tensions we've been seeing, it was also an opportunity for countries like India to wait and watch, to play the foreign policy game, and then perhaps emerge as a winner. And in today's times, who knows who's a winner today, how things change later, but at least as of the last few days, with the trade pact coming through with the US, coming on the back of another one with EU, I think from India's perspective, at least, this is looking like almost a crisis turned into an opportunity, where India has managed to park that uncertainty aside, show that it now definitely has geopolitical leverage, and arrive at a deal which is making India look like, okay, it is a good negotiator. India did not buckle under pressure, and Prime Minister Modi has firmly established India's place in the midst of this chaos that we are seeing geopolitically. So I think it's been very interesting learning times for all of us. And yes, businesses have suffered. Businesses have suffered because each time you go back to the drawing board, there are some changes, and uncertainty is never good. But I think it's made businesses as well as governments very resilient to adapting to change.
Yeah, that's very interesting that you mentioned going back to the drawing board. I think geopolitical tensions coupled with what we're here to talk about, right? AI, which is also rapidly changing, evolving in terms of the technology, in terms of the companies involved, the sectors that are getting involved now. So I'd love to kind of hone in on that as well and kind of talk a little bit about where India fits into this narrative, because I think we've seen a lot of conversation about the US-China rivalry, right? Like Silicon Valley has been kind of the gold standard. after the DeepSeek moment, China has been sort of a front runner as well. I would like to hear from you about where India fits into the AI narrative with respect to policy making and with innovation.
No, great question, Ananya. And I think if geopolitics is one part of what we're seeing play out in terms of uncertainty or in terms of dynamic change and opportunity, the other leg is AI. And I think the combination of the two makes it even more exciting because, again, technologically, we have never seen these developments before. When I talk to startup founders, they're like, we've never seen this time in our entire lifetime of building businesses. Some are, of course, very young, but some are seasoned founders. And they're like, this is unprecedented, truly. Now, to your question around US, China, and India, I think that's a lot of commentary around it. And critics would often say India has been slow on the uptake. Look at the US. There's a lot of comparison with Silicon Valley, a lot of comparison with China. And the view that I think Indian policymakers are taking is that we want India to adopt AI the India way. And has India been slow? Has India not been able to adapt? While the government is very seized of the situation and they realize that, yes, there is this criticism, at the same time, there is no panic. And when we talk to government officials, they're like, we're okay for it to play out in the way it is. And we're okay for the AI story in India to be an India AI story. And the other conversations that we have very often is that, number one, a lot has changed in the last 6-8 months. So the kind of, we would say, slow adoption that we were talking about, now you are seeing very interesting, business models on AI, a lot of interesting companies being built in India. So this whole notion that there is no AI in India is now being challenged because we are seeing a lot, see companies like Emergent and what they've done on vibe coding. And those are fantastic examples of the success story in India finally playing out. But more than that, I think what is important is that will India have its own unique model? And by that, I mean the obsession with building frontier models, the obsession with saying, where is India's LLM? I think that is something that needs to go away because we may or may not get that. We may not get that large model from India. Although we've seen the Prime Minister nudging some of those companies, we expect a few announcements coming through ahead of the AI summit. But what's important is that is India going to have the adoption play? Are we going to see applied AI play out much more than the frontier AI models? Are we already seeing that adoption play come through? Why is it that global AI companies are lining up in India to invest here and in data centers? So I think what we need to understand is that India as an AI market is perhaps a very, very live and attractive story and will continue to be the story. Of course, that brings with it other challenges around, are these large global giants just going to use India as a market to mine data and all of that? But I think there is no panic in the government. The government, when we talk to policymakers, they're like, yes, it's our job to nudge companies. It's our job to provide the infrastructure to make sure that the necessary infrastructure is there. But the government's working, Ananya, just to sum it up, on two pillars. Number one, it is if this technology requires global capital as well as global technological know-how, let's attract the investments in. And that's why you see those big ticket, numbers like Google investing $10 billion in Vizag, to large companies going to come and make big announcements in India around the AI summit. We can expect a barrage of announcements when the AI summit happens. So yes, we're not closed. We're not a closed economy. We're absolutely open to technology and capital coming into India. But on the other hand, India is very well aware of the fact that this is going to be a strategic advantage. And developing that Atmanirbhar, as you call it, or the domestic capabilities or sovereign capabilities, and ensuring that we're incentivizing that and ensuring that we're not lagging behind there is definitely top of mind for the government.
Absolutely. And just for some of our audience members who are here from maybe not from India, maybe not super aware, I just want to say the India AI Summit is going to happen between February 16th and 20th. So later this month, and like everyone is flying down, Sam Altman will be there, Microsoft, Google, everybody's supposedly going to be there, and a lot of our vibrant startup community as well. So if anybody is or wants to be in Delhi, maybe that's an event that you want to put on your radar. And Shweta, just interestingly, I want to go back to that point you made about the frontier AI race, right? I think the messaging thing that we're hearing from the government and adjacent agencies, also from big tech companies, is what you are saying, that we may not be in the frontier AI race or the foundational model race, and we may not need to be in it either. But what I'd kind of want to press on is from the startup founders that I've spoken to, I've also heard that maybe it's not a losing race, because that is where the deep investments are, the deep pockets are, the deep profits are. So in your cohort of startups, what is the readiness for different forms of AI innovation, right? So whether it's the adoption and application layer or the frontier layer, what kind of innovation are you seeing, and what sort of readiness are you seeing among the startups? And from the government side, like you mentioned, that they are supporting certain companies and kind of promoting that innovation regardless. What is that playing out like, and what is maybe the composition of maybe the foundational model research versus the adoption layer like?
So Ananya, there is a lot of attention across the entire stack, the entire AI stack. And let me first talk about the adoption layer. I mean, I think we have been doing this series called the India AI in Action to actually go and understand, with demos, with real statistics, data, case studies on how India's startups are truly adopting AI and what are the tools they're using. And I think the stories that are coming out are fascinating. And I think those are stories that still need to be told, because India being the adoption play is something that we are going to see happen in a very, very big, large scale way. Now, will we see the typical terms of the power users versus the laggards? Of course. And we're already, like, I can see it happen in our membership alone. There are those who are yet to wake up to the power and the potential of AI and would be the laggards. And then those who are seeing almost a hockey stick adoption rate and are the power users and are adopting it. They're understanding the tech. They're experimenting with different use cases and are already applying it and seeing the business benefits. We have real case studies of our founders telling us on how AI is leading to real benefits for them when it comes to their businesses. So I think that is a given that we're going to see that happen at scale. I think when it comes to the frontier model development, the one thing that the government's been saying is that, do we need the large models, or are we okay with the smaller models? And those would be the sector-specific models. The government's also pushing hard on a lot of real-world impact and use cases of AI, right? Secretary Krishnan famously says that we're not necessarily looking at cat videos, right? What we're looking at is that what is AI for impact? And the Prime Minister's like, let's look at the positive impact for AI. When we talk to Sarvam and the kind of projects that, say, a company like Sarvam is doing, which is one of India's most, I would say, prominent AI companies, they talk about a lot of projects that they're working on with the government where there is real societal impact, so whether it is, property tax registrations, or you're seeing with the Niti Aayog, which is an economic think tank. So they're working on real life problems using AI that they seem to be solving. And I think those are the kind of success stories that the government's also excited about. So I think overall what we're going to see, the third part is that when we're also going to see the development of the models, we need to realize, I think the kind of messaging we're seeing now come out of some of our companies is just the sheer diversity profile of India, the sheer fact that India is a voice-led market, So we're going to see that kind of innovation, which will be truly uniquely Indian, that will come out. And I think what also establishes is that India may today be a leader for the global South when it comes to AI and its AI model or its AI approach, more than model. By this model, we talk about the LLMs or the models, right? When I'm saying the AI approach would be a uniquely AI approach, which is, the comparisons are often with the US and China. But are we going to say that, no, India is a different market? India's always played to its strengths. Like, look at the software services sector, which of course right now is in distress because of the AI impact. But India truly built its own unique model around software services, which was uniquely Indian. So let's see how the AI story plays out for India, but it will be an India story. It will not be an emulation of the West or of China. It will be the India way, as the government famously likes to say.
Absolutely. And you kind of segued very nicely into my next question about, so not exactly about the Indian IT company, just for context. Basically, yesterday when Claude Cowork was released to automate a bunch of tasks, the Indian big IT stocks crashed a little bit on account of jobs getting taken away. So I want to talk a little more about the vulnerability of these AI companies and coming in and sort of working with audiences like ours, right? Like you mentioned, we're a diverse country, we're a highly populated country, but obviously really big users of AI, which all of these companies have kind of announced in the past. So when we talk about AI taking away jobs, so to say, of course, for the IT sector, because it's sort of your rote, mundane jobs, what does it mean for the tech sector as a whole, like the startups that you work with as well, whether they are adopting AI or not adopting AI? How are you seeing the makeup of the headcounts these companies change and the roles change?
Yeah, so I'll address it in two different ways. One is the large IT companies, which is not necessarily our membership, but definitely is India's strength, and it's the software services sector. It is the SaaS sector, and are we going to see those? There are terms like SaaS apocalypse, or I don't think I got the pronunciation right, but the apocalypse of the SaaS, world. And then, of course, we saw the sell-off on Wall Street. We saw that being mirrored in the Indian markets. So I think those are real fears, right? And you see fear-based selling now showing up in the indices, and that is coming on the back of an understanding that there will be some disruption, there will be some job displacement, and the real story there will be how quickly do you adapt, how quickly do you reskill, how quickly do you re-engineer, and that will be the big challenge for the IT services sector. We recently, when we visited the West Coast, we had a session with the legendary venture capitalist Vinod Khosla, and he talked about how in 5 years you're going to see 80% of the jobs being reskilled or going away of the IT services sector. So that's the kind of fast, I would say, rejig we're going to see in this space. And the true test lies in the adaptation, in the reskilling, in the ability to be able to I would say, adapt to the change. I think the second part that you're talking about is the real job displacement. And how quickly is it happening? It is happening for sure in some sectors, right? And we're seeing that AI can handle this, whether it's some creative sectors or it's marketing teams. But when I talk to a lot of the startups and founders, what they're saying is that AI is allowing them to scale and do the job of maybe 10,000 people. It's not necessarily displacing those 10,000 jobs I'm talking about in startups, not about the IT services sector. There's real displacement fears, right? But when it comes to startups, it's just providing an opportunity for scale. And in fact, it could be even creating jobs, because at the end of the day, you do need those skilled engineers, but perhaps that same engineer can today be, as one founder said, a 10x engineer or a 1000x engineer, because the capabilities and the tools and that the powerful tools this engineer has suddenly make him way more powerful. And so he's delivering at a different scale, pace, and intensity. But is it necessarily displacing jobs? Maybe not. It could be even creating jobs, because ultimately, as most people would say, you need humans to work the AI, and you need more skilled humans. So the kind of jobs it will create will change, but it may or may not displace jobs depending on which sector we're talking about, really.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful context. And I think thinking about the scaling of it and kind of giving these smaller companies more wings rather than sort of beating them out is a very interesting take on this as well. And I think, Shweta, we've discussed what is happening on the ground right now, but what I'd like to know is, having worked with these startups so closely, what are the maybe top 2 or 3 asks that they have in terms of policy? And the reason I'm asking for this is because from the government's perspective, I think we see a lot of consumer protection, right? We see asks for data localization and sovereignty, and we're seeing like how foreign companies can function in India, maybe how they can use our data, how they can provide services and things like that, right? A lot of regulation around that. But behind the scenes, is regulation getting in the way of any innovation? Is it enabling any innovation? Are there any future sort of wish list items that founders have to make it easier for them to innovate in the space of AI?
So yes, sticking to AI, I mean, of course, we have a very broad-based membership. The Startup Policy Forum has about 60 plus high growth members, which includes a cross-sector. So we're cross-sectoral industry body, including deep tech, AI, fintech, consumer. So we have a very wide representation of startups, but specifically talking about AI, and we've been doing a number of sessions with AI companies, both our members and a wider audience. And I would say, I think broadly, there are two parts to the AI regulation story. Number one is more infrastructure and less regulation, right? What is the government doing to provide infrastructure, compute, GPUs? There's that whole mandate around, is there enough being done around the infrastructure side? And I think the government's been very actively answering those questions and providing that support. And so that's the entire infra play where the government plays a very important role. I think the other is on regulation, and will regulation come in the way of innovation. And I think that is where, again, India is going to see a uniquely India way emerge when it comes to AI regulation. And in my conversations with policymakers all the time, there is just one message we hear. When it comes to AI, India wants to follow an innovation first, regulation as needed approach. And you can call it regulation second or regulation as needed, because the government is definitely in no mood to put in place knee-jerk, regulatory measures to curb AI, despite the concerns around harm, despite the concerns around privacy, despite the concerns around copyright. So while there are real concerns emerging from the use of this technology that requires regulators to step in, India is in no mood to be in a knee-jerk. When we did see some knee-jerk regulatory measures, when deepfakes became a problem, we saw those notifications come in. When there was a concern around use of AI generated content for elections, we saw the election commission step in. So the government does, we see time and again some bit of stepping in when there are concerns of harm. But the overarching understanding amongst the policymakers is that the current landscape, whether it comes to data privacy framework of India, which was recently formalized with the DPDP rules, or it is around the country's entire criminal and penal code and the legal infrastructure, there are enough legislations and regulations in place that can take care of the harm of AI. So let us not regulate for the sake of regulating, because that's going to come in the way of innovation, because any regulation will be restrictive. And however light touch you want to make it, however progressive you want to make it, at the end of the day, regulation is always seen as a blocker and not necessarily an enabler. Having said that, we are seeing time and again some or the other prescriptive measures coming through. For instance, on copyright. Now, copyright's become a big debate globally, right? And we're seeing lawsuits all the time. So while METI, which is India's IT ministry, is primarily in charge of AI, and the India AI mission sits under METI. We're also seeing the Ministry of Commerce deal with the copyright issue, and we recently saw a proposal come through which talks about mandatory licensing. And we got a group of stakeholders together, including AI startups, to say, let's examine this proposal. And the good thing is, Ananya, in India, and that's the beauty of a democracy, right? There is stakeholder consultation. Those proposals are put out, and we have a platform to go and say, what, this is not going to work. And that's exactly the feedback that we picked up when we did this AI and copyright session with AI founders. And there were clear concerns around retroactive application, of how the understanding of how models are trained, around the problems with the mandatory licensing model. And when we picked up some of these observations from what was being proposed, I think the government's very receptive to feedback. And we made our submission just recently. We're going to continue to have stakeholder consultations. But the last thing I want to say to this answer is that there are no easy answers to AI regulation. I think it's such a dynamic technology, and it is evolving so rapidly and with such grave intensity that it's not just India. I think regulators around the world are grappling with, what do we do with this? And I think there is a broad understanding that let's not rush into regulating it, because no regulation can keep pace with innovation right now. So let's wait and watch. Let's regulate as needed. Let's provide an enabling environment and keep a close watch. So that's the broad approach of the government.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to take a beat to ask people if they want to drop in questions. Now would be a good time. We'll start taking them in a couple of minutes. And just one last sort of follow on from me. It's very interesting what you said about the consultations and kind of being able to be in conversation with the government, right? You've been in this space for about 10 years. You've worked for like Uber and Salesforce and these big name companies. And today you're kind of the face of the startups, right? So one kind of broad question that I have about bringing your concerns to the government and kind of shaping policy alongside them is, how much transparency is there, how much opacity is there, and how much do boots on the ground in New Delhi sort of matter?
they matter a lot. And I think I'm a big proponent of that theory that, you know what, it's all very well for us to be armchair critics. And a lot of people love doing that, or the government's doing this wrong. You know what? Let's try and work with the government. Let's have collaborative and constructive, engagements with the government and say, firstly, let's educate policymakers. And I can tell you, Ananya, I love this question because I've been engaging with policymakers, both in my previous avatar as a journalist and then over a decade now in public policy across many organizations, from hardcore ride-sharing regulations at Uber to data privacy with Salesforce, or anything and everything to do with the startup ecosystem at Sequoia Capital, which is now Peak 15, and now with Startup Policy Forum. And I can tell you, I have seen magic happen, and just by pure evidence-based policy advocacy. Because I think the one thing that we need to understand is that at least India is a democracy, and we have platforms available. And that's the whole rationale behind me setting up the Startup Policy Forum, because I think what startups need is a lot of hand-holding and an understanding on how to present their issues, how to communicate with the government. As you said, how to have those, open those doors, have to have feet on the ground. And then the minute you have that and you've opened that door, you at least have a seat at the table to have these conversations. And very often what we underestimate is the receptiveness, the openness, the willingness of the government to want that feedback and to receive that feedback, because governments want to do right by industry. Similarly, industry wants to do right by government. They want to be compliant. So we underestimate this magic, because when I'm talking to founders, Ananya, and when I'm talking to bureaucrats, I almost hear the same sound. It's the same messaging, The ambition is the same. The goals are the same. It's all a lot of nation building that we're talking about. But we often don't bring these two stakeholders together. And when we see these public-private partnerships emerge, that is when that magic begins. Because A, you get policies and regulations that are being framed with feedback from the industry. So they're naturally more progressive, or at least have the right inputs from the right stakeholders. And two, with the partnerships, you can see the power of government as well as the innovation and the firepower of industry coming together. And I think today more than ever that has become relevant, but that's where the role of public policy professionals comes in. Because, unlike big tech that has large teams, now, you think about Meta, you think about Amazon, you think about Google, they have large, vast teams sitting in Delhi doing that work for them. Startups can't afford that, or do not have the ability to hire large-scale teams to do policy, or in some cases do not have the skill set to do it. And that's the reason why we exist, because our idea is that while big tech knows its policy game, India Inc. or corporate India knows how to go about it. We want to enable the startups to say, and also more than that, they don't have the time and the bandwidth, because they're building at a pace which is ferocious, right? So I often tell founders, you sit in Bangalore and in HSR layout and Indiranagar and build, because that's what you're good at. But when I need you to be in Delhi, or when we want your inputs, or even sitting there in Bangalore, you provide us your inputs and we'll do the walking and the talking with the government in terms of interaction, and we'll be your, hands and feet on the ground. I think that is where this model is working. And I think we're seeing traction for the Startup Policy Forum, because startups want to be heard and the government wants to hear from startups, because they are the new age nation builders. And that's why we want structured engagement with the government, where we can relay that feedback on what new age policy making needs to look like.
Absolutely. Shweta, I think this is also a good time for you to maybe just tell people how they can become SPF members if they want to be, and I'll just kind of look through the questions that we have for you, and we can move on to the questions after that, if that works for you.
Super. So we are an industry platform that is membership based. It's an invite only membership, but you're most welcome to write into us. Our website is indiaspf.org. We essentially accept members from all sectors across all stages. We're stage agnostic, we're sector agnostic, and there's a lot of conversation, a lot of questions that we often get is at Startup Policy Forum. So what is a startup? Do you define, how can a listed company be a startup, right? And then how can a decacon be a startup? But I think the answer to that is that startup in India, at least, is a catch-all phrase for talking about new age companies that are not necessarily dynastic businesses. These are companies that could be bootstrapped or could be venture funded, but at the end of the day have been set up by, an individual who has a disruptive idea and who's probably who are category creators, who are building businesses. most tech-led, but could also be non-tech businesses. And I think this is what we define as the new economy, and we are here to represent the new economy. We do not have any exclusionary criteria other than the fact that if you're majority owned by a large conglomerate, be it foreign or Indian, we definitely don't prefer to have you in our membership, because we truly want to be for a founder-led startup that needs that support and help, because we feel that others have other platforms to get that help. So we've seen tremendous traction, Ananya, a little over a year old, but we now represent 65 very high growth startups in India across sectors, together valued at about $100 billion. So we're very proud of the fact that we're being trusted by India's startup ecosystem to be their voice with the government.
Absolutely. And yeah, we are on time, but I would request if you have a couple of minutes, if you could hang out for another 10, then just address some of the questions that have come in. I have just about 3. 2 of them are from the people on the call, and then one is sort of an internal question that's come from one of my colleagues as well. So if you can just start off with, in your current batch of AI founders, what is the biggest wall they're hitting in the frontier AI race? Is Mr. Mustafa Ahmed has asked this question. If you have an answer to that.
I think initially there was a lot of talk about infrastructure, right? And I think the government has stepped up to solve that, right? So initially there was, I would say, a bit of a lag in the way India was being able to provide that the compute. And I think the government has now stepped up a lot on that front and provided the necessary infrastructure capability. And now I think we just have to allow time, because again, the problem is that when India is developing its frontier models, you have to understand that the Indian data set and Indian landscape is very different, whether it comes to diversity or it comes to, in terms of the sheer size and scale that we're seeing in India. So the wall that they're hitting is more in terms of the ability to give them time to build, and the pressure that you face, like, oh, DeepSeek did it in such a short time, or it's happening in the US. So I think, yes, that's large capacity available, that's large infrastructure available. So you have to allow India that time and pace to be able to build those models.
Absolutely. And then the second question is actually also from him. It says, we hear a lot about engineers returning from the US. Are they really joining the startups or mostly getting absorbed by big tech GCCs with deep pockets? And realistically, how can a homegrown startup compete for that kind of talent right now?
I think talent is a big thing. We're hearing all sorts of terms. There is a new term called Barbie. I can't remember the exact, a full form of that, but, it's about founders who are coming back and setting up in India. It's about Indian founders moving to the Valley. So, this talent question has become very big. On one hand, there is this trend of, there is a complete talent exodus to the Valley, because that's where your enterprise customers are. That's where the real innovation is happening. And Indian founders here are not feeling, and you had some headlines saying 100 founders have moved to the Valley, AI founders have moved. So there is that conversation about Indian founders moving to the Valley to build there, because your customers are there. Then there is a conversation about a lot of Indians coming back to India, both engineers, because of the H-1B issue, because of the fact that they want to come back, and all the geopolitical stuff and all the policy stuff that we're seeing play out in the US is playing. So I think we're seeing that two-way exchange right now. Talent is short. I was talking to a founder based in the US who was saying, when I'm trying to hire in India or I'm trying to hire in the US, it's the same problem. There is no talent. Like, there is a real shortage of skilled talent for AI. So there is a huge demand for AI engineers. So for the ones that are coming back to India, yes, GCCs, but I think startups, there are huge opportunities. The government's working on a plan. We're working on a plan with the government on how to streamline some of this, I would say, reverse brain drain that is taking place and take advantage of it for the startups. So it's a real trend that is emerging. And I think to our point, that while there is a crisis in terms of, displacement of jobs and the fears around it, there's also an opportunity in terms of, new job opportunities that are being created for AI engineers.
Great. And then this question is from Sneha Banerjee. She is asking, how is India working on nurturing young and reskilling existing talent to become future-ready roles around AI? So I think you kind of touched upon this in your last answer, but maybe if there's any direction that you can give us and where the development is happening and what your conversation with the government maybe look like a little bit.
Yeah, so I think number one, there is stuff on the private sector side, and then there's stuff on the public sector side. So we've heard IT Minister Ashwini Vaishnav lay out an entire plan around AI skilling, right from schools to how the government is planning to ensure that we become I would say AI fluent, AI the AI enabled, and there is that AI skilling and training that is happening right from schools up until colleges, and there is an entire plan that is laid out. On the other hand, you also have the private sector that's stepping up, right? So we have a member Scalar that has been in the entire field of technical education, but now we're seeing them come up with very specialized programs that are taking care of the fact that you need that AI skilling at scale, and you need that workforce that is AI skilled. So I think that is a live and active conversation. Everybody knows skilling is an opportunity. Everybody knows it needs to be done at scale, and it's happening both at the private end as well as the public end.
Great. Yeah, we've heard of a lot of skilling initiatives from the government, from Microsoft, from everyone over the years. And I think the commitments are huge, right? They're like 10 million, 15 million. So it's good to know that it's like a cohesive thing and not just sort of PR material. And then I guess the last thing that we'd want to end with is the internal question, which is, you mentioned that you were in the US recently and you were engaging with stakeholders there. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about how you compare the policy environment for AI and startups in this part of the world, or largely we can talk about the global south or developing countries versus what is the conversation in the US and the conversation and the implementation, right?
Yeah, so I think on implementation, there's no doubt that the Valley remains the hub of innovation, and I think what we're seeing play out there is dramatic, right? And we often hear a lot of noise around the regulation part of it there, but largely it is a very free scale. Innovation-led, innovation-first approach, right? And we're seeing that obviously play out in the adoption, in the innovation, in the models that are coming out. As I've already touched upon, that India on regulatory front, as I explained in detail, is an innovation-first regulation as needed model, where we are going to say, yes, we want the leadership in the global south. When we see the AI summit take place later this month, India is very clear that we want outcomes that have that interoperability. We want outcomes that are adopted by countries, across the board, which sort of ensure there is some harmonization of regulations and policies, and that India can take that leadership role, if not for the West, or if not for the entire AI innovation-led economies, but at least for the global South, because there India truly has a place to be a leader, and there India's regulatory approach is something that will be interesting to watch. Even though we've been very clear that we will not come in the way of innovation. And, the Prime Minister has told all policymakers time and again that we want to adopt AI and there has to be a positive approach, and we don't want heavy-handed, regressive, high-touch regulatory architecture for AI that will hamper any innovation. So that remains India's large approach, with a very close eye on what's playing out in terms of harm and ensuring that, if needed, India is standing by to regulate.
Great. I think that's a perfect summation of the conversation that we've had as well, and a great note to end on. I just want to take a moment to thank, my colleagues as well, Ithika, who's in Bangalore, Damilari in Lagos, who introduced us. Kinling is in Taiwan, kind of managing our behind the scenes. Thank you so much, Shweta, for coming and joining us. This was really, really insightful. I think it's very beneficial to everybody, like whether they're in the startup space, VC space, policy making space, to kind of have context from somebody who's that close to the action. So yeah, it has been great. If there's anything else that you want to kind of add for us right now, can. Otherwise, thank you so much and have a great evening.